All right, sorry about that, but good morning, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. This is Mark Millen with Flight Safety Foundation, and along with me I've got Greg Marshall and Frank Jackman. All of us were trying hard to get our mics to work. You guys want to say hi?
Yeah, good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everyone.
All right. Well, together we're here to talk about our GSIP program, or Global Safety Information Project. We hope you've already heard something about it. Greg, Frank, and I are Flight Safety Foundation staff members, and we're involved in program and technical work for the Foundation. And for decades, the Foundation has been at the center of so many efforts to advance safety. We've said it before, but improving safety today is getting tougher in this industry, and it never stops being interesting. With a stellar aviation safety record we have today, it gets harder to improve things because so much has already been done with technology in the aircraft, in airports, and in air navigation. The industry has improved its training programs and procedures through safeguards on lessons learned from other accidents. And safety management systems are widespread. In some organizations, they've been around for more than a decade. This is part 2 of a 4-part series on GSIP. And we'll assume that most of you know something about this and may be practicing as an aviation safety professional. Our invitations went to the people and organizations that have worked with us before in focus groups and workshops in the Pan American and Asia Pacific regions of the world. They also went out to the Flight Safety Foundation membership. So with that as our assumption, we'll move through topics fairly quickly today to make the most of all your time. If you hadn't heard much about this project, I would encourage you to visit the flightsafety.org website and review the GSIP pages and documents we've already have on display. We've got 2 annual reports and some of the first documents covering our toolkits. And if you're a member of the Foundation, you have access to the draft portions of the detailed toolkits we'll be talking about today. One other note before we start, you'll notice a status bar at the bottom along with a slide count. This provides a position marker when reviewing a recorded display of the webinar. We won't release slides separately, but if you're viewing this recording, those will allow you to jump around to quickly get to any part of the webinar. So let's take a look at the agenda for today. Right now we're going through the introduction on the first part of our agenda. But in each of the GSIP webinars, we cover data collection, data analysis, information sharing, and information protection. We are suggesting components to programs that might be part of either an individual organization's SMS or a regulator's SSP. At the end of our presentation, we'll provide a conclusion, and if we take roughly 10 minutes on each of those items in the presentation, it'll take about an hour. Then in the second part, we'll take some time in the discussion portion for questions and comments, and we'd love to hear from you. So first of all, we'd like to find out who is in our audience and who they represent. You know, what sort of stakeholder are they? So if you could help us out and respond to this poll, we'd love to find out. And I'll wait as you vote and give us your answers. Looks like we've got about 50% of the responses coming in. Some people still deciding. Maybe we don't have enough choices. But it looks like 90% of the people have voted, so let's share that back with everybody. Big portion of today's audience is representing a regulator. That's very interesting, and glad to hear that. Beyond that, we've got a few folks from commercial airlines or other operators, and some folks that are in the category of other. So that's great to know. Thank you very much. And with that, Frank, do you want to get us started?
Sure, thanks, Mark. John Beatty, the Foundation's president and CEO, was in Brussels 2 weeks ago at the annual EASA FAA Safety Conference. He participated in a panel discussion on digitalization that covered a wide range of topics related to how the aviation industry is making use of the vast amounts of digital data that are available today. In the digital world, we are not just automating things, we are measuring and recording just about everything we can think of. As was discussed at the Brussels conference, modern aircraft generate hundreds of gigabytes of data per flight. It's part of the reason that the world's databases and the internet are growing so quickly. According to some reports, the size of the internet quadrupled between 2014 and 2016. Digitalization is pushing an already digital world into a much more vivid and highly quantified recording of everything that goes on. We will be talking about data capture today, but not only that, we will discuss how data becomes information and information becomes knowledge for better decision making. Without good organization and analysis, this volume of data can be overwhelming. At the end of the day, we need to focus on what's most important. How and what we can learn from this data to avoid a bad outcome. In the first webinar, we went through how to do the basics in safety management. This time, we will talk about more detailed gathering of digital data for risk management. But before we get into this, I would like to ask a question. Why? Mark and Greg, why do we need to make the industry safer than it already is, and why is the Foundation working on this project?
Well, I'd like to get started answering that question. First of all, human life is sacred, and why would anybody need to perish because an error or mistake is committed? 70 years ago when the Foundation started, we introduced some of the first safety conferences and training on accident investigations. Let me talk a little bit about the process of accident investigations. In past years, the industry learned a lot from the study of failures in aviation. We built a robust process to investigate the failures and then worked hard to get assurances that this would be used for the purposes of advancing safety, not for blame and prosecuting the guilty. The process that was built for investigation was like shining a spotlight on all conceivable parts of the industry. The aviation accident investigation examined anything that contributed to the ultimate failure, and they also examined what could have disrupted the chain of events leading to the catastrophe. Final accident reports became public information and are available to all. The reports contain recommendations spanning across all stakeholders. It led to a much greater public understanding of the risks and the areas of our industry that needed to be strengthened. The results were not just for the operator's aircraft or the countries involved in the accident, but the lessons could be applied across all countries, all equipment, and all airlines. Now we've introduced safety management systems, and that has brought a whole new set of data to tell us something about the opportunities for making improvements. It's not necessarily like the spotlights of an investigation because it's more focused on the operations side of the business. And so, while it does lead to improvements, it's not always sharing the knowledge like a public investigation report. So this project is about how we tap into this knowledge and make it possible to apply across all stakeholders.
When you think about all the sophisticated ways we can monitor operations, it's impossible to have everyone monitor the results of everything in highly complex operations. No one stakeholder could ever digest all of that information. So just imagine how many aircraft are in the air at any particular moment, each of them having the potential of recording very many gigabytes worth of data. But with a massive level of digitalization going on, and most of it in separate places based on who is collecting it, the real opportunity is to identify the safety issues we could solve and at the same time pass that knowledge on to fellow stakeholders or partners.
We know many organizations are collecting this data and doing their own analysis, and some are attempting to share what they learn. The vast majority of this data is not part of any accident investigation, where again a report is shared publicly, so that means this data is not protected in many places of the world. While we would like to see information protection as the foundation for all the other activities, we know that SMS programs are being adopted around the world and that the protection measures will just have to catch up. So in the Global Safety Information Project, we are taking all 4 of these activities and covering them in greater depth. In our last webinar, we started to talk about some of the basic approaches to these activities in what we call Level 1. During this webinar, we will cover the contents of Level 2, expanded levels of data collection through flight data monitoring programs, the expanded analysis this requires, and greater levels of information sharing.
We also have levels 3 and 4 yet to come. But before we get into things further, I'd like to ask one other question of our audience. First of all, how familiar are you with GSIP? And if you could take time to respond to this, that would give us a little bit better sense of your familiarity and what we might need to do during this webinar. Looks like we got about 60% of the participants voted. A little over 80. I suppose we can close that and then share it back. So half of you have been involved in focus groups, workshops, or previous webinars. So that's very good. I'm glad we've got that level of understanding and participation.
Mark, I think what's interesting there too is that like the earlier webinar we ran, we also noticed that there are quite a number of, relatively large number of those that are actually coming to this for the first time as well.
Yes, and we don't want to go too quickly for those that might be seeing this for the first time, but we're glad that they're with us. So first of all, let's talk about some terms we mentioned in our last webinar. To really make sense of the safety data or information, we need to recognize the broad categories of safety data. So here's some of the things we mentioned last time. First of all, public safety information. As safe as things are today, there are still accidents and investigation reports. There are also summaries of these reports that are publicly available. Reputable organizations spend a fair amount of their resources to pour through and summarize the accident trends and describe the accident categories that affect the industry most. Next, we've talked about safety program information. Service providers in the industry gather their own information in many different ways to know how their processes are performing. They include the safety assurance monitoring that's going on through auditing and monitoring and recording of flight data analysis programs, and we'll talk about those today. And they also include safety reporting systems that are often voluntary and critical to hear what's happening from people involved in the actions underway in day-to-day operations. And then last, we've talked about reportable occurrences. The regulators have usually defined certain types of events that they must be informed about through special reporting. They are often produced and shared through completion of forms or investigative reports that are given to a regulator by a service provider. Then next, we mentioned in our recommendations in our first webinar on taking inventory of safety data that's collected by examining the top-level risks for the industry and thinking in terms of the categories of data. We suggested that generally there is an accountable organization and there are supporting organizations for just about every accident category. Knowing what data is being collected and processed is a worthwhile effort. We've talked about some of the common processes that are used to collect good information in all these categories. But more importantly, if you don't have data in some of these categories, you may want to consider strengthening your processes by adding it, especially if it's a risk area that's a high priority for your organization. Lastly, we mentioned the different types of data across all processes, and remember that each of these types of data has its limitations.
In the second level of intensity of our toolkits, we suggested that airlines and operators collect and make good use of the data measured and recorded on board an aircraft. Most of us are familiar with data that is captured through flight data recorders for accident investigations. ICAO standards have long been published for flight data recorders, and enhancements to those standards have led us to robust levels of data capture for investigations. But in order to gather that data for a flight data monitoring program, it usually requires the installation of a device called a quick access recorder, simply known as QAR for short. Now, these recorders make it possible for PCM CIA cards to be removed and the data uploaded to a database kept by a flight data analyst at the airline. ICAO Annex 6 has a standard requiring all aircraft above 25,000 kilos max takeoff weight, built after January 2005 and involved in commercial operations, to have these programs in place. But QARs or equivalent equipment are also found in other aircraft, even below 25,000 kilos, including, for example, in helicopters. The photos.
Hey, Greg, we probably should say too that some of those are wireless now, and a lot of folks are capturing data that way.
Yeah, sure. Some of those are fairly instantaneous, particularly when aircraft are pulling up to gates. The data can be automatically downloaded. So in this slide, you can see a couple of photos. There's a photo of a cockpit voice recorder on that left-hand side. You can see in the very left is the cockpit voice recorder, and the quick access recorder and its cards is on the right-hand side. One of the obvious things to note, of course, is that the black boxes aren't in fact black, but very bright, vivid orange. In this diagram here, or in this slide, we have a few clips of events that have been captured and are available as flight animations. Most of these show cockpit instrumentation. In an accident investigation, these might be overlaid with an actual cockpit voice recording. We'll play this first one shortly, and we assume for most of you that these tools are pretty familiar. Now, you'll notice the approach path of the flight ahead of the aircraft and a late attempt to switch from a taxiway to the actual runway at a fairly low altitude. Now, this flight resulted in a go-around, and you will notice the flight path where the aircraft climbs quickly during the execution of the go-around maneuver.
$500. 400. 300. 400.
So as you can see, there's a rich amount of data that can be captured from those recordings. We'd also like to point out that measuring detailed operations data is not just conducted by an airline. Operational data may also be collected by airports, air navigation service providers, maintenance organisations, manufacturers, and others. Most of what we will show that we describe as part of Level 2 is examples from an airline. Once you pull the card from an aircraft, there are any number of software providers that have systems to take the raw data, that's the ones and zeros, from the card and make sense of the data traces. We know there are a number of suitable providers, and many have different features to identify a number of flight data events. In this slide, the screenshot on the right shows a traditional plot of the various parameters that are monitored. Whilst these plots have been used widely in accident investigation, the newest software packages can do this plus run animations to review the entire flight from a chase aircraft perspective, together with a cockpit instrumentation display as shown in the left-hand screenshot. Additional plots or map overlays are possible at the same time a video plays the position of an aircraft in flight. Now, the tools are really versatile for doing analysis of what happened on a particular flight. But of course, what happened is still only one step in the process for identifying hazards and determine why things happened as they did. We talk about healthy investigations in the last webinar and the need to regularly move through the 5 whys process to get enough to suggest how these issues could be solved. Yet the animation tools can get even more helpful, and we'll show you some examples of that in a moment.
As we went about our research in GSIP, we learned about a variety of parameter monitoring that happens in flight data analysis programs. Some parameters are monitoring for exceedance detection, and of these, some can happen on any flight, such as a high rotation rate, stall warnings, GPWS warnings, which is terrain, and air collision avoidance system warnings, flap limit speeds, fast approaches, and others. Other parameters that are measured or monitored for exceedance detection can be reviewed when the company is alerted by a specially reported flight, such as reduced flap landings, emergency descents, engine failures, rejected takeoffs, or go-arounds. Now, besides exceedance detection, there is other data that's being monitored in a routine way. Of these, some are direct, like takeoff weights, flap settings, temperatures, rotation and liftoff speeds, maximum pitch rates, and altitude during rotation or touchdown, gear retraction speeds, heights and times, touchdown points, and so forth. And then yet other parameters are derived through calculations, such as SID and STAR compliance, unstable approach, SOP compliance, aircraft energy management, flight path deviations. And lastly, some are related to airworthiness or performance data, thrust levels, airframe drag, avionics and systems performance monitoring, flight control performance, engine deterioration, and brake and landing gear usage. In the GSIP project, we basically found that these are not necessarily standardized, and some unusual event conditions have to be determined based on the operating parameters of the equipment and the operator. It's important to note this when it comes time to discussing the sharing of the data later on. But essentially, many operators are looking at these parameters for specific triggering events and triggering moments. As we mentioned in the last webinar, one of the most critical steps in risk management is to take newly discovered hazards and use a standard risk matrix to conduct a risk assessment. When new hazards are discovered through flight data analysis programs, it's usually advisable to gather additional data that can help put together how that hazard was seen in better context, and then reapply the risk assessment before acting accordingly.
Okay, so let's take you through a couple of other examples demonstrating the power of some of the flight data analysis program software tools with a couple of publicly available recorded animations which we've taken from YouTube. In this first display, you'll see a portion of a demo from a software provider with the familiar flight path displayed. But in this case, you'll also see that the path is overlaid with terrain using Google Earth. Specific flight alerted events are shown along the flight path as the view of this flight leaves the runway.
Furthermore, all flights can be viewed in Google Earth, including flight trajectory, event markers, georeferenced flight charts, and navigation aids and airway waypoints. Using the SmartFDM 3D web animation tool makes flight analysis even easier by replaying your flight via the web browser without having the need to install any high-cost proprietary software. 3D animations can even be easily shared with its unique URL to pilots, so you can make flight safety debriefings with flight crews even when they are at remote locations far away from your safety office. The instant 3D replay.
Okay, so one last clip here shows the analysis of an approach path of an aircraft against the glide slope and expected normal vertical and lateral variations. These expected variations are drawn with a rectangle at regular intervals along the approach path. You may be able to see as you look closely that this flight starts to the right of the center line, but during the descent the path of the aircraft travels to the left and below these boxes as the aircraft approaches the runway.
We realize that it might be a little bit difficult to see that path, but it's interesting in terms of a display. Remember, we said that airlines aren't the only stakeholder taking measured data and conducting analysis to improve safety. ANSPs have the ability to analyze several flight paths as they seek to reduce hazards along the flow patterns in and out of an airport or across typical flight routes. Overlapping these routes in 2 and 3 dimensions are quite common these days, especially as precision flight paths have been adopted around the world. These more precise routes allow for greater consistencies and reduce risks if they are planned and executed properly. Yet we know the transition to these precise paths are still underway, which actually creates more reasons to monitor how successful they're being implemented.
These are all great tools, but doesn't this all get too complicated? We talked about safety indicators in our previous webinar. Does this mean everything we monitor through flight data analysis programs becomes a new safety performance indicator? I thought we said it was impossible to monitor everything.
Well, part of prioritizing what's important is making good use of safety performance indicators. When it comes to safety indicators, we're suggesting that stakeholders choose wisely. Just as a business needs to choose wisely on its own key performance indicators in order to be successful. We think safety performance indicators will have the best success when they're used for the leverage that they provide the organization. Sometimes we found that airlines may have chosen a safety performance indicator for every part of their operation, just like the one displayed here. Safety performance indicators can cover metrics across key accident categories or where there's a significant concern for an organization's risk register. This could be the accident categories that we talked about in the data collection inventory matrix. The dashboard displayed above is an example of the kind of displays that could be used to show the current status of safety performance indicators as they relate to major departments of an airline. The metrics aren't defined in this display, but we've often found that the organization may have adopted an index of multiple metrics with green bands that are at or better than target, yellow bands showing performance that's not yet making significant improvement, and red bands considered unacceptable or deteriorating performance. In this display, it's often of great interest to know performance against peers in the industry, but this is not always possible with the different data tracked and monitored by different organizations. While benchmarking is often desirable, it's not what's an essential element in this part of our toolkits. Generally, companies track their safety performance indicator also using displays that show the history of the performance against the targets. We know that the performance performance improves, it can be important to reset the targets, just as KPIs are reset in the business world. We make suggestions in our toolkits about examining and selecting these indicators carefully as it becomes a primary tool for a focus within the organization on safety. We suggest alignment with the industry's top critical safety issues and that they are revisited on a periodic basis to determine whether they're effective and whether the targets are set properly. We go on to suggest some things about setting the targets. Organizations should understand that current performance levels may have an inherent level that's defined by the practices and variations of normal behavior in their process. Getting to new levels of performance may require a real shift in behaviors to get to significant performance improvements. This may require understanding the components underpinning your current performance before setting a target for new performance. Some organizations set targets for themselves to be the best in the industry at something or best amongst a specific peer set. We find this kind of target setting can produce great results, but at the same time we suggest everyone recognize a goal to be perfect is unreasonable. To achieve your goal can take time if human factors are involved and training is required for adopting new techniques or methods. The visual here suggests that the potential performance improvements could start out very steep as people adopt new practices, but some residual issues are bound to be exposed over time, and new targets may need to be set when strategies are developed for the newly exposed issues. We introduce within this level in our toolkits a simplified bow tie analysis to recognize any operation has its threats, its defenses, normal recovery measures, and potential negative outcomes. It's handy for really breaking things down and quantifying in a risk assessment on what exposure you have to these threats, the effectiveness of your defenses, and how these produce the rates of any undesired state. If there are any weaknesses in recovery measures, they can be improved to avoid negative outcomes. And when you start using tools like these, you may simply examine whether defenses and recovery measures are considered sufficient or not. In later webinars, we'll get into some of our suggestions for further quantification of these elements, and there are templates that are available from for some common aviation accident categories.
For those of you who may have been a part of our previous webinar, you might recall we talked about the work of analyzing performance through a distribution curve. Imagine that you're measuring the exact landing position on a runway over the course of thousands of operations. You might create a distribution curve that looks like the one above, or in the slide. Aircraft are landing from the left to the right on this chart, and this illustration emphasizes the rates of probability that unacceptable performance could lead to an accident. The effort of the analysis and the resulting solutions we offer through safety mitigations are to sharpen the peak of this curve and bring the volume of a small set of operations outside of an acceptable range into an acceptable range with a much lower probability of having any undesired outcome.
As we proceed midway through the improvement that's being managed at an airline, the quantity of flights in the safety margin is reduced and the volume of acceptable area flights grows.
And as we proceed further, that shift continues. And remember also we said that the acceptable regions of safety are often defined with a risk assessment matrix. This is a tool that also keeps getting used through each level of intensity in our toolkits. It often looks something like this, but getting everyone to use it consistently requires a bit of thinking. We believe one of the important steps is to consider a way to more fully describe and customize each of the elements on the scales for both the severity and probability.
Okay, let's move on to how this information is shared. As we prepared this webinar, we couldn't find any examples of organizations sharing their flight data analysis events through a YouTube video. So clearly there are probably few, if any, airlines out there willing to make their lessons learned publicly available. How are we really going to share this information if everyone holds it so tightly?
Okay, well, first of all, we mentioned in the last webinar that organizations want to make sure they focus on sharing the information internally. It's probably much easier to make the information known inside an organization without the risk of becoming public. Company websites, internally circulated documentation, and special safety meetings are all places where this information can be shared and keeps the frontline staff familiar with safety goals and expectations while showing progress towards those targets. Yet one of the most important areas where this happens is amongst safety teams that can be formed within an organization. These are the groups that are charged with conducting some of the analysis and determining what solutions are going to be the most effective against the current risks. It is through these teams that the initial results are shared and provides them with the opportunity to think through what they are seeing in the data. So we suggest this is where the first level of questioning the results, additional sanity checking if you like, is applied. For example, does it agree with other things the team knows about the operation? Can there be multiple interpretations? It is here where the real critical thinking has to be applied, because the effectiveness of the solutions depend upon knowing the results of this analysis and the strategies that will be effective to change the results or improve performance. It is also one of the first opportunities for additional involvement or interaction with the regulator so that they can share their own knowledge and perceptions about what is happening. But even if the regulator doesn't participate, the sharing of the outcomes or how often, when and where these teams meet might be something to actually share with the regulator. Ultimately, these teams are aimed at introducing effective risk mitigations, and the effective solutions can often be brought about through these teams.
One critical area where overall safety performance is reviewed is with senior staff at an airline. It's generally where a top-down look at the key processes is shared with the current plans or mitigation efforts underway. The agendas for these meetings don't just include SPI performance, but also results from significant investigations, reviewing the findings and recommendations, and the solutions implemented. It can include audit results, findings, and corrective action plans, and it doesn't have to be done separately from other operations top-level reviews. The review and discussion of efficiency alongside the need for safety improvements can be a healthy activity and can help to recognize that both are achievable.
Well, how can the industry protect this information so that it doesn't become part of a newspaper story that suggests the discovery of safety issues is a failure of someone or some organization? Or so that the information doesn't become part of litigation that suggests the discovery is a criminal act and worthy of prosecution?
Well, Frank, I'll try to answer that, and I know that I set you up for asking these questions, so he's not normally this grumpy. Once again, let's remind people of some of the things we've mentioned in the first webinar. Boundaries of acceptable and unacceptable behavior should be defined. Voluntary safety programs should have protections for individuals from the company and techniques should be utilized to help keep identifying information from being disclosed throughout the risk management process. We went on to say that state and regulatory support is essential within both policy and regulation, but recognize there are only a few countries that have established this yet, and the kind of safety information we are mentioning here. Lastly, we said that labor organizations are expected to be involved in the process, which can build trust through the efforts to focus on safety improvements and not discipline. In our Level 2 toolkits, we go beyond the basic principles, requirements, and mechanisms of protection, and it gives stakeholders the tools to implement ICAO standards and recommended practices to enhance protection. However, it's important to keep in mind that protection is not linear, and circumstances may require stakeholders to use recommended practices as part of the basics of protection. In our Level 2 focus, we are achieving protection through collaboration and understanding between aviation stakeholders at both the state level and the industry level. That collaboration and understanding will facilitate the use of safeguards such as de-identification, protective orders, and in-camera review. The objectives are to help stakeholders implement both ICAO Annex 13 and ICAO Annex 19 recommended practices and expand the just culture model necessary for protection, including a commitment to protect mandatory safety reporting. Annex 13 recommends to consider the protection of additional records of accident investigation and limit the disclosure or use of such information for purposes other than safety. And Annex 19 recommends to extend the protection to mandatory safety reports and adjust existing laws and regulations to further protect reports and promote reporting, and use of advanced arrangements to facilitate the protection of such reports. The key attention on our Level 2 toolkits will be helping stakeholders collaborate on protection through the use of these advanced arrangements, such as memorandums of understanding or memorandums of agreement, as well as examples of arrangements that have been successfully used around the world. Our toolkits at Level 2 will also attend to the policy and necessary precedent required for enhanced protection, including protection that prevents the use of safety investigation reports from being used to apportion blame or liability. Our Legal Advisory Committee is helping us to develop model memorandums of understandings and other agreements and safety information policies based on existing arrangements from countries around the world. We will have additional discussion on the just culture environment and how ICAO standards and recommended practices help companies and states reach a full commitment to safety information protection. In the end, our toolkit will provide states and organizations guidance and tools to implement the protection of safety data and safety information through collaborations, policies, and precedent. So we've covered a lot of material, and once again, we'd like to summarize this by emphasizing the main activities that we described in detail in our toolkits. In order to know what's really going on in organizations, you have to collect good data, and at this level we've described more in terms of measured data. At the airline, this is flight data monitoring programs. That data has a number of different ways it's processed and illustrated to show the flight events and close calls, but at the end of the day, it has to go through a risk assessment for determining its acceptable or unacceptable status. Learning from multiple events is done in a similar way as each organization works their performance to meet safety performance indicator targets. Lastly, sharing that data and the status through the safety teams is important, along with the critical thinking that they must take on before new solutions are devised. We would like all of this to be built on a foundation for protecting information, but we know there are many places in the world that have yet to put these protections in place through their own policy and with the regulator through its policy and regulations. So as we've covered all this material, one of the things that we're wondering is what stands out for you in terms of the areas that need improvements the most. If you wouldn't mind, please respond to our poll, and then we'll share that back with you. Folks are voting. It's getting tougher for me to see the percentages, but looks like we're a little over 75%. Maybe it's good to close that, share that back with everybody. More of an even split than we've seen in some of the past webinars. Data analysis and information sharing in the webinar that we did earlier today also were leading concerns amongst folks that were in our first audience. So with that, it's appropriate for us to talk a little bit about data analysis and information sharing, and a special portion that we want Fort Hill, a group that we've been doing some work on, to tell us about an SPI survey that we are running in conjunction with the GSIP project. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Tim Welke, and Tim will give us some insight on what that SPI survey is all about.
Great, thanks, Mark, and good morning, everybody. So as a part of the GSIP project, Flight Safety Foundation developed a safety performance indicator survey. For those who are not familiar with safety performance indicators, SPIs allow an organization to define a set of desired safety goals and to establish a mechanism that allows them to evaluate the effectiveness of their daily actions towards achieving those goals. With that said, this survey is intended to collect information from global aviation stakeholders regarding their use of SPIs and safety metrics. Collecting this data will assist Flight Safety Foundation in structuring the GSIP toolkits and presenting information at future GSIP workshops in a way that is most beneficial to the participants. Specifically, Flight Safety Foundation will be able to offer actionable recommendations for the use, potential development, and refinement of SPIs based on industry-wide practices. The foundation will also be able to provide insight into which particular data sources are providing the most useful information on different risks that could be associated with a particular SPI target. So the SPI surveys that are completed by respondents will be, first of all, de-identified, and then they'll be integrated into an interactive dashboard, which you can see here. This dashboard will allow respondents to see the direct impact of their inputs, as well as the aggregate impact of inputs submitted by other respondents around the globe. When you're using this dashboard, users will be able to develop on-demand safety intelligence just through the simple click of a mouse. So, for example, you'll be able to customize how you view and interact with live response data through a set of filters. So these filters include responses by region, risk type, domain, safety data sources, among others. This type of interactive filtering allows users to conduct targeted deep dives into all of the meaningful aspects of the survey. For example, like understanding which SPIs or risk areas are most important to different domains in different regions. So, for example, if you're an airline or aircraft operator, you might be interested in runway safety data and how other airline or aircraft operators throughout the world gather and apply this information. So to dive into this information, you would click the runway safety filter on the top left, indicated by the red arrow on the screen. And then you would click the airline and aircraft operator filters in the center, indicated by the other two red arrows there. When doing this, the dashboard will automatically display how airline and aircraft operator respondents gather runway safety data and what information they track as an SPI or performance metric. Additionally, we can see across the industry how important respondents viewed an SPI or performance metric. Since every aspect of this dashboard is interactive, you can click on any visual data element to dive even deeper and view survey response data from kind of a unique, customized angle. For example, you could view it by ICAO region. If you prefer another view or you just want to dive into another focus area, you can easily clear your current dashboard view and just simply start over. So all GSIP stakeholders, and in particular the webinar attendees, are highly encouraged to take the 15 to 20 minutes necessary to complete the survey. The results of the survey, as we mentioned before, will help further shape the GSIP toolkits and really provide a unique insight into a topic area with limited information availability and depth. Participating in the survey will increase the value that Flight Safety Foundation is able to provide to all the GSIP stakeholders as a whole. And again, like other aspects of this project, all responses are secure and all responses are anonymous. In the next webinar, Flight Safety Foundation will present the most up-to-date survey results and summarize the impact of the information collected in even greater detail. For example, we might cover which SPIs are considered to be the most important. And then finally, to access the GSIP SPI survey, all you have to do is click on the web link provided in this webinar. And we'd also ask you to encourage your colleagues and other industry partners who are not in attendance today to complete the survey if they're able. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it back over to the Flight Safety Foundation.
You'll find it to be pretty interesting just to go take the survey, because in that survey and the way it's structured, you'll learn a little bit about what we have already learned through some of the workshops and focus groups we've already been through and what people have told us. So we're just about to wrap up what we've gone through today. And as we construct our toolkits in each section, we focus on the critical items that are needed for success. We have a summary of that for the level 2 that we have covered in this webinar. It starts with good data. We talked about measured data like flight data analysis programs and detecting certain events through triggers. We also covered more about the data quality and roles for gathering this data. As far as good analysis goes, we mentioned more today about safety performance indicators and how simplified bow tie analysis tools and the importance of getting back or going back to the standardized risk assessment matrix is. In terms of sharing results, we continue to focus on sharing information throughout the organization and through specific safety teams, with communications back to employees and recommendations on where the regulator can be involved. And as far as protecting information, we've talked about the collaborative approach with the aviation authorities. Now, we've mentioned we did a previous webinar. Today we talked about level 2 in terms of a webinar, and we've covered both of those. Our upcoming webinars will cover what's recommended in levels 3 and 4. So Greg, if you'd like to wrap it up.
Sure. You can gain access to the draft toolkits on the Flight Safety Foundation website, and you'll find those in the section on GSIP. You may have a Flight Safety, or you must have a Flight Safety Foundation membership in order to see these. For those of you that have participated in the past, in one of our workshops and provided us with information about your programs, we have set aside a temporary membership access to our site. We would like you to examine what we have developed so far and provide us with ongoing feedback. We'd also like you to be able to see what other organisations have considered for safety performance indicators and help to tell us what you might be doing today. Now, as we previously said, this survey takes about 20 minutes, but we think it would give you a better insight into the SPIs from other organisations across our entire GSIP project. And you can also find a link to the survey on the handout.
Hey, Greg, I have to mention right now, because I just noticed as we were going through here that we neglected to get the handout uploaded. So that handout will have to be circulated via email.
Okay.
It's a one-page piece of paper that has some of the details that you've mentioned here, but specifically like links to that SPI survey will be useful in having that email. So we'll get that out in the next 24 hours.
Okay. All right, that's good. So you see you'll be able to see the dates for future webinars on that handout when you receive it. So for those that have registered for this webinar and all other members, we will send new invitations. Yet if you want to plan these now, if you have a look at the link, you'll be able to put those in your calendar. Lastly, if you want to give us some constructive feedback on our toolkits and this entire process, please see the Membership Centre link on the handout when you receive it.